Oi oi Savaloy, it's your boy here to kill the joy, Jack Slack, Fights Gone By podcast episode 147, and we're coming at you ahead of JDS versus Ngannou, and some other stuff on that card, which we'll get into in a bit. News! Lots of matchups, a little bit of drama, gossip stuff. We'll do matchups first. So, tons of these announced this week. Volkan Oezdemir versus Ilir Latifi rebooked. So. That was a fight that I forgot was happening. Then near the time I was like, actually, that could be an interesting fight. And then the fight was cancelled about 2 hours after I had that thought. Jimmy Kruk versus Misha Serkinov. That's a good fight. Jimmy Kruk, my boy. If you saw him against Paul Craig, that was fantastic. Using the Kimura to turn him over, using the Kimura to pass the guard. And doing good stuff on the feet. And Serkinov had a little bit of a fall from grace, but was considered a top 10 guy at one point. Could be considered a top 10 guy now. I don't know. I'm not in touch with the 14 dude to decide the ranks. Glover Teixeira versus Nikita Krylov has been booked for UFC Vancouver. That's nice. I feel like that Vancouver card's coming up good. I can't remember who's on it now. But there's been a few announcements in the last couple of weeks for that card. But Krylov coming off that surprisingly good performance against Ovince St. Preux. Glover Teixeira coming off almost being brained a few times and coming back to win. What else you got, Chin? Jim Miller versus Clay Guida. That's a fun old man fight. They're in this interesting position where I feel like they can still whoop a lot of ass if they're put in the ring with young up and coming guys. But I also feel like there are a ton of guys out there, probably coming up through the regional scenes, who, if they were put in there with Clay Guida or Jim Miller now, they could probably, a few of them would probably smoke them. But they're in that interesting old man role, and Clay Guida coming fresh off that win over BJ Penn, which proved that he was better all along, and Jim Miller coming off being manhandled by Charles Oliver. Actually, has he had a fight since then? I think he's had a fight since then. But still, a hard old bastard. Weird piece of booking now. Colby Covington versus Robbie Lawler. After all that talk about getting Colby Covington in with Kamaru Usman and booking Ben Askren and Jorge Masvidal so that they're busy, no, we're not getting that. So God knows what's going on. We were going to get Robbie Lawler versus Tyron Woodley too at one point, and we were all going, that's a bit weird. But now that's off too. So we've got Colby Covington, I presume, not defending the interim title. There's no word of it so far. But an odd fight nonetheless. However, Robbie Lawler stops a good takedown and murders dudes with his hands. And Colby Covington, really, his striking is kind of like the Kamaru Usman sort of striking, where the concern about the takedown and then he'll just flop on you with 100 punches or whatever. On a happier note, Jose Aldo has just signed a multiple fight contract extension with the UFC, which is kind of like, we're getting into Anderson Silva territory now, where we all assumed he'd be retired about 2 contract extensions ago. He had a huge contract extension back in like 2015, 2016. We were all like, that'll see him out. And then he just kept going. I suppose once you're making those big bucks. Actually, looking at the payouts from a couple of the more recent Bellators, they're all no win bonus for the guys who, the old names like Rory Mack and Bendo and people like that. If you can get on one of those, I think Alistair Overeem has one where he's got like either a very small win bonus or no win bonus. If you can get on one of those, like Arlovsky, get paid $250,000, $500,000 just to turn up and lose a boring decision, why not, is what I say. Also, good news, MMA finally legal in France coming January 2020. Would love to see the UFC do a card over there. I would go over there for a card over there. I mean, I just got back from France, and I still would go back. Actually, I love France. The food is incredible. And if they did it in Paris, well, Parisian people aren't great, but if they did it in Paris, that'd be well worth going to. Repurpose one of those cycling stadiums that they have. And sadder news, the MMA beat in the MMA Hour came to an end this week. Luke Thomas obviously took over the MMA Hour from Ariel Helwani. I thought he was doing interesting things with it. I enjoyed the analysis and stuff that he brought to it. So he's off going to do his own thing. The MMA beat actually is the one that I'm probably going to miss more, because I used to enjoy just putting that on and listening. Because, it had a few guys that I know on, like Luke, Chuck, Jeff. And it's nice to listen to just 4 dudes who actually know and cover the sport ramble about the sport. So I'm probably going to miss that more, but it's a shame because the MMA Hour has a long and storied career in the sport. Anyway, let's talk about some of these fights coming up this weekend then. Oh, actually, I forgot to mention that the UFC have been trying to or rather it's come out this week that the UFC have been trying to overturn John Jones versus Matt Hamill. Now, if you remember that, it was way back in the day, but that was when John Jones mauled Matt Hamill, and then hit him in the eye with a downward elbow. And everyone complained, like, well, it shouldn't be illegal, but it is illegal. You know, that's the case. It's like when Eddie Alvarez downward elbowed Dustin Poirier in the collarbone or whatever it is. The move is illegal. You know it's illegal. Don't do it. There is no organisation where it is legal. So, what? You know, you have no grounds for, like, complaining there. I'm against overturning fights unless, you know, like, egregious decisions I'd happily see turned into a no contest or whatever. But even then it's uncomfortable because I don't like, one, having the power to overturn their own fights, but then I don't like a commission just being able to overturn its own fights too. The referee decided it was a foul. It was a foul. The guy got DQ'd for the foul. You know, like, what more is there to it? He didn't not do the foul. The foul hasn't changed over time. We haven't reevaluated and said, yeah, downward elbow into the eye socket is actually okay now. Just moronic, and really shows that they want to market Jones as unbeaten, even though you can market him as, you know, not having been beaten in the, you know, the regular sense. Everyone who knows about it is like, okay, cool, we understand what that was. But anyone with an ounce of sense isn't saying, like, but we should remove that from his record because it doesn't reflect well on him. As opposed to all the drug cheating and fingers in the eyes that he normally does. Anyway, on to the previews. Got an okay looking card here. You know, I'm not blown away by it. UFC on ESPN 3, so it's going to be actually on proper ESPN, which you would expect them to pull out the big guns for. And in a sense they have. They pulled out a couple of cannons, and then the rest of it is just pea shooters. But what a stretched metaphor. But Junior Dos Santos versus Ngannou is the headliner. You got GCF Formiga versus Joseph Benavidez, which is a good one in the co-main. Demian Maia versus Antony Rockman. Yeah, you know, Vink Pichel, Rose. Let's go from the bottom. Actually, fuck, if I go from the bottom, I won't know half of these people. I mean, Junior Albini I know from being consistently awful. He's fighting Maurice Green. A couple of women fighting. Blah, 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 blah. Let's get up into things I know. Oh my god, they got Vinicius Moreira on the card, and I was just watching a fight with him because he fought Alonzo Menifield in Menifield's UFC debut, and he is literally the worst striker in the UFC. He kept trying to back kick the guy, and he would take 3 steps to turn. He'd just go, oh, sorry, you can't see me, but I'm spinning in my chair. But yeah, he'd go step to slowly turn and back kick, and the guy would already be hitting him in the back. It was fantastic, and he kept doing it. He kept getting knocked down and then getting up and going, well, my back kick will save me. You're like, has this ever worked on your sparring partners? If so, you need sparring partners who aren't, I don't know, lumbering oafs, heavy bags. Maybe he's been training with Big Nog, maybe that's why. But he's fighting Eric Anders, and Eric Anders down on the prelims here, and not even like a featured prelim. This dude was headlining a card with Lyoto Machida a little while back, and he had a good fight with Lyoto Machida. Then he had a barn burner with, was that Santos? Oh no, the Santos one was the one where he just got brutally beaten up. Kicked Voldemort Tim Williams in the face, coming off the ground. I love that. That's a perfect example of the area of weakness in the technical stand-up. Lost to Elias Theodorou by split decision. Have we touched on Elias Theodorou being cut? I feel like we have, but it's kind of shit, you know. If he's beating people, doesn't matter if his style's boring. I mean, this is a sport. It should be that those people have to adapt. I get that it's kind of embarrassing that dudes who strike like that are still outpointing your fighters, but the onus is on them to win. Kind of links in with like what's happening with the Dana White Contender Series. There's a guy that, I can't remember his name, but I was watching it just the other day. Basically, he was doing awesome, goes for a takedown in like the last seconds of the fight, as anyone will do to seal the fight, basically. If it's a close scrap, or, you know, even if it's not that close, but you feel like you need to hammer it home, get the takedown in the last few seconds of the fight, because you're probably not going to knock him out in the last few seconds of the fight. I mean, Chuck Liddell did this to steal the win against Vanderlei Silva, and Chuck Liddell never took anyone down. Yeah, Dana White then came out and was like, nah, it's because he did the takedown that I'm not letting him onto the UFC. And you're like, fuck's sake, man, that's not the point. Well, it is the point now, clearly. Being exciting is the point. But at any rate, back to Eric Anders. He's on a 3-fight slump. Just came off that fight with Lumpini Khalil Roundtree, who had a spiritual rebirth, went out to Thailand, learned to kick really quite well in a few months, which was pretty incredible, and was doing like a real traditional, you know, hoppy lead leg, bouncy, into switch kicks and stuff like that. Got battered. So 3 on the trot that he's lost. He's up against Vinicius. Fuck, is it Vinicius? Vinicius Moreira. And Moreira hasn't fought since that desperate attempt at a fight against Manyfield. But Moreira was like undefeated. Oh no, he had 1 loss, but he was, on a terrific streak of submissions at that point. So this could be a good one for Anders, because he's probably not going to get beaten up on the feet, because this guy moves like a barge. And Anders has always been able to stop a good takedown. He's very good at, especially if guys get on the single leg, or if they go for the double, he'll feed them the single, but he'll use the quarter Nelson to stiff arm their face out, and when they sort of start backing up, he'll hit them with a knee to the face if he can. I think probably what you'll see is, unless Anders is really shot, you'll probably see him crowd this guy along the fence and try and beat him up there. Well, that's what he used to do before he had all these bad fights. That'll be fun enough, I reckon. And if not, maybe we get to see Moreira on the ground, and we go, Jesus Christ, it's night and day. This guy on the ground is a monster. Ricardo Ramos versus Journey Newson. Journey Newson new to the UFC. Ricardo Ramos, he's always been around. Yeah, decent fight. Alonzo Manyfield versus Paul Craig. This is nice. And this continues Paul Craig's, is it a streak? I don't know, habit of fighting like unbeaten guys coming into the UFC. Tyson Pedro, Luis Enrique da Silva, Magomed Ankalaev, Jimmy Crute, Kennedy Neshchukwu. Oh, that was a weird fight with Kennedy Neshchukwu, but I was super glad when the submission came off. That was a fucking scissor sweep. Double wrist control scissor sweep just to have the guy come back up into the triangle. Paul Craig is really very quite slick on the ground. Not always as slick on top, and certainly his takedowns aren't tremendous. If you saw the fight with, was that Neshchukwu or Crute? But his knees were like bleeding from mat burn. He just throws himself across the mat. I thought his striking actually looked better against Neshchukwu, because Neshchukwu was billed as the striker, and Craig was doing all right. He can kind of kick with impunity because, the whole thing is, if you get taken down, you can sort of scramble through and look for submission attempts. But his hands have always been kind of garbage. However, I thought against Neshchukwu, he actually looked all right. His hands on the feet. He's kind of slow, but, it's interesting watching this tall Scottish guy who can't really move very fast go for wheel kicks and stuff. Well, put him against Moreira and make it a stand and bang only match. That's what I'm saying. But Alonzo Manyfield, interesting character. If you saw him on the Contender Series, when did he fight? The first time he fought Daniel Jolly, and that was end of round 1. The guy, I think it was a broken orbital bone, but it was a doctor stoppage. And clearly that is not exciting enough to get Dana's bonus shooting money out the top. And he had to fight a few more times in like LFA. Came back to the Contender Series, fought Deshaun Boatwright, and Deshaun Boatwright tried to head kick him right off the glove touch. And Manyfield swung at him. I don't know if he connected or not, but because the guy was on one leg and walking into him, he fell on the floor, and Manyfield just sat on top of him and hammered him as much as possible. Referee waved it off. The other guy was like, "What? Come on!" Because it was just one of those ones where if you go spastic, the referee will go, "Oh my god, that other guy's being brutalized," and split you up. But yeah, Manyfield, he made up for it in his first UFC fight against Moreira. Obviously Moreira's garbage on the feet, but looked good there. Did notice against Moreira he tried to sucker punch him again right off the glove touch, but maybe that's just his game, so watch out for that, Paul Craig. Drew Dober versus Polo Hayes. Drew Dober always interesting in that 155 class. Good fun guy. Another good lightweight fight, Vink Pichel versus Roosevelt Roberts. If you remember Vink Pichel, he had it was a long-ass layoff. Yeah, 2014 he fought Antony Ngannou. Antony Ngannou, that tells us how long ago that was. But in 2017, he came back for Demian Brown, won, beat Joaquin Silva, again, on a UFC Fox card, and then they put him in with Gregor Gillespie, and Gregor Gillespie just manhandled him, because Gregor Gillespie does that. I can't wait to see Gregor Gillespie again. When's he fighting again? I'm not seeing anything booked for Gregor Gillespie, that's a shame. Back to Vink Pichel. Yeah, fun, decent, scrappy banger. Relatively good all-rounder. He's got fairly good takedown defense, but just got mauled by Gregor Gillespie because everyone so far has. Roosevelt Roberts is good fun because he had that fight with Thomas Gifford, and they were saying that one of them had been... I came into it halfway through, and one of them had been on the undercard of a Mayweather fight, and I was watching Roosevelt Roberts piece this guy up and going, oh, he must be the one who was on the undercard of the Mayweather fight. Turns out Gifford was on the undercard of a Mayweather fight or something like that. and Roberts was just drawing him forward and hammering him with straight punches. It was really nice. Both of them pretty gangly for the weight class, 155 that is. Lightweight for the those of you in the know. Did really good, and then on the ground, Gifford was inverting and trying to... He was doing cool guard retention, kind of like Rafael Lovato, which we talked about in my latest Patreon piece for the Patreon boys, the masterful MMA grappling of Rafael Lovato. We talked about his guard and some of the cool things he did, but there were moments when he just had to, keep rolling and retaining guard because he was worried about getting hit or was being hit. Gifford here was just sort of retaining guard, but also being hit all the time. Like, he didn't ever... It was sort of like he'd get close to doing something cool, like an armbar or snapping back on a triangle out of the inversion, but most of it was just him getting beat up. But yeah, Roosevelt Roberts, fun guy. And obviously he beat Daryl Horcher on The Ultimate Fighter. Guillotined him, which should tell you that he's good enough to fight at least Khabib Nurmagomedov. Yeah, those are pretty good. I mean, looking at that down this card, I did the same thing that I always do, which is like, what on earth? There's 2 good matches and then the rest of them you're like, I know half of that matchup, but is that really? Yeah. And then the more you look at it, you go, actually, no, there's some pretty good ones on this one. Craig Mennefield is going to be good. Ramos versus Newson's got a good chance of being good. Anders versus Moreira has, interesting stylistic matchup, even if both of them are quite flawed in some ways. Pachel versus Roberts, yeah, fair enough. You've got an old-timer. Is he really, can we call him an old-timer? I mean, he had the big layoff, but yeah, we'll call him an old-timer versus a young up-and-comer. This is where someone chimes in to tell me that they're the same age or something like that. When Deontay Wilder told Tyson Fury that boxing is a young man's sport, and it turns out Deontay Wilder's 3 years older than Tyson Fury. What else we got? Damian Maia versus Antony Rocco Martin, who some people call Tony Martin, some people call Rocco Martin. It's quite confusing. Even the Fight Pass thing has it as 2 different things. And then, if you click on his newest ones, it won't show you them because it's on ESPN+. Thanks again, ESPN Plus, for killing Fight Pass. Dana White was saying that they're going to re-announce, or they're going to relaunch Fight Pass in October, which is a great way to keep you on the hook. I mean, I need it for my job because I get to watch old fights and talk about them, but like anything in the last few months that's happened, I can't go back and watch. It's a fucking pain in the arse. Hopefully they sort that out. Unless they're just announcing that they're getting rid of the Flash player and going to use something modern. Still, no one quite as bad as Bellator. I mean, Bellator's is free, but they have all their fights online and no search function. Absolutely incredible. Anyway, Damian Maia, Rocco Martin. Let's talk about this one. I think this is a good fun fight because Rocco Martin, passable wrestler, scrambled out from under guys like Jake McKenzie and people like that, but not Division 1 or Division 2, like All-American, gonna grind you all on the fence sort of wrestler. Not the kind of guy who is going to be just hell for Damian Maia. Maybe he does stop all the takedown attempts and stuff like that, but he seems like a much fairer fight for Maia than guys who can actually... it's not a fair fight if you can wrestle, sorry. But you know what I mean. It's a much less horrible fight on paper for Maia, this one. Maia, has he bounced back from those losses yet? Or is he still on a losing streak? Oh, yes. No, he choked out Lyman Good. I forgot about that. That was back in February. God, that was forgettable. But obviously had the hard ones. Title fight against Tyron Woodley, couldn't do anything, basically. Colby Covington beat him, and then Kamaru Usman beat him, both pretty decisively. Has this amazing single leg that he sticks to, but if you can't get it, and he can't get under you for the half guard, which we talked about this using the takedown attempt to pull half guard with the underhook, which is much, much different to just pulling guard. That's pulling yourself underneath a single, basically, and then coming up. But it's a very labour-intensive game. You're going from shooting a takedown to going to your back to coming up on the takedown again. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of movement involved there. It's quite tiring to do over and over again, even if it is a very clever way to complete a takedown on someone who otherwise would stop your takedown. But again, we talked about that in the Rafael Lovato piece because Rafael Lovato had some very cool ways of doing that. One of them was he'd shoot the takedown and then Musashi would sprawl and he'd sit in underneath because Musashi's legs would be out straight away from him, and then he'd lock up the not overhook, but Leitch style half guard with the outside leg over the top of the opponent's trap leg. Again, read this article because it's got pictures and shit in that will show you what I'm talking about. But the other one that he was doing was he'd do the TJ Dillashaw style shot, which is where you shoot in like on a double, but you hook the opponent's lead leg with your leg so that you're tripping them over it rather than trying to turn the corner and finish. And Musashi answered by hitting like an Uchimata to throw Lovato into bottom position. But he threw him into bottom position, and Lovato had the underhook, and Musashi had straightened out his leg for him by throwing with the Uchimata. So he came straight up into a takedown, into a sweep. I suppose it's a sweep because it's from the bottom. Very clever way to get in if you can't finish those takedowns. And that's Maia's whole game. Try the single, sit down, come back up on the single, or use the Lech style half guard. Lucas Lech is the guy I'm referencing in case you want to look him up. And it's not actually spelled Lech, it's Lucas, Leite. But if you watch his matches, he's brilliant. He's got medals in the no-gi worlds, in the gi worlds, and he's done it against like huge guys too, despite not being a real heavyweight himself. Real high percentage sweeping technique in no-gi, really, coming up on that. Well, not the single, but the dog fight. It's in an interesting spot because guys are really working on sitting back on the leg if you start using the underhook half guard at all. So it's sort of being, and of course coming out of the knee shield too. The leg can always be attacked if it's on the outside. So you're seeing a lot more guys play like butterfly half guard or half butterfly guard rather. It's interesting how these things are playing off each other in the grappling competition meta at the moment. But Rocco Martin, if you don't know much about him, low kick is his number one thing he does at the moment, and he hit Jake McKenzie with like a dozen of them in the first round, went back to his corner, and his cornerman immediately goes, I need more of those low kicks. He, really loves it, falls back on it a lot. Scrambles well, has a few submission losses, but they're quite a while. I can't remember how far back they are. Hold on. Yeah, I mean, he hasn't been submitted since like 2015 when he was fighting Leo Santos, who we all know is super fucking legit, and Beneil Dariush, who is also super fucking legit. Both those guys were like world-class jiu-jitsu competitors. And of course, that was at lightweight, and now he's up at welterweight, where he's had a lot more success. I mean, he had the sole loss really was to Olivier Aubin-Mercier, which was a split decision. But had good fights with guys like Sergio Moraes. Well, that was his most recent one, Sergio Moraes. Ryan LaFleur. He was an underdog in that one and knocked LaFleur out. Jake Matthews obviously finished with an anaconda choke. Matthews' striking looked very one note in that fight, and he kept diving in behind this overhand right and trying to shift through with a left hook like he was Gennady Golovkin. And finally, Martin just timed him with an uppercut as he was leaning forward. Matthews sort of fell into a shot, and then he hit that anaconda choke with, I think it was from the half guard. He basically trapped the leg as he fell over, but put him to sleep. Very cool. And then Sergio Moraes. Now, the Sergio Moraes fight is the one that's giving me a little bit more faith in Maia in this match, because Martin immediately pushed, or rather pressured Moraes to the cage, and Moraes picked up the easiest single leg you've ever seen and just knocked him over off picking up the leg. Kind of like that first Rafael Lovato Edgar-style knee pick against Musashi. The act of picking up the leg threw him so off balance that he fell down. And then the later times that he tried it, he had to actually pick up the single and finish the single. But yeah, I think that'll be a good one. I would really like to see some Demian Maia push him to the fence, get on his back, and do that. I mean, what I'd really like to see is Gunnar Nelson versus Demian Maia again, because that fight was so much fun. So someone who can survive with Maia while he's passing their guard and just making them look silly on the mat. That's what I want to see. But, you know, the grappling style, it does age slower than guys who are relying on their reflexes and stuff on the feet. And Demian Maia is like 40 years old now. But, and in fact, we just saw this week BJ Penn got in a fight at a strip club. The video starts with him basically knee on belly on the guy. And I don't think he's hitting him. I didn't see him like land any really big blows. So, I mean, props to BJ, because there's lots of awful stuff coming out that might be or might not be true about him at the moment. But he could have just stomped that dude's head in, and he didn't. So, fair enough. But yeah, I mean, you can still grapple to a pretty advanced age. But even then, if you watch BJ Penn against guys like Clay Guida and stuff like that, he's a brilliant technician, BJ Penn. And it's still that decline in athleticism and his body and his reflexes and stuff has really cost him. So at some point, Demian Maia is just not going to be able to compete, even though he's got this amazing grappling. It's what I was trying to say in a very roundabout way there. Giuseppe Formiga versus Benavidez. Good fight. I mean, these guys have been floating around the flyweight top 10 for years. How weird is it, actually, that we've got a co-main event flyweight fight, even though we want to basically cut the flyweight division? They keep giving us really mixed messages here. Benavidez is in an interesting place because he's ranked number 1 in the world, but he had this weird little break after the Cejudo fight, That was 2016. He was out through 2017. He was booked to fight Ben Nguyen, but tore his ACL up, which is obviously a long layoff. Changes camp, comes back against Sergio Pettis, looks like he's never struck a day in his life. If you go back and watch that fight, I mean, he's always been kind of flappy, even when working under like Dwayne Ludwig, but he's just all over the place in that Pettis fight. Gets back into the winning column against Alex Perez, Dustin Ortiz, looking a lot better, looking like he's remembering how to do things, basically. Meanwhile, Jussier Formiga just come off that win over Devison Figueiredo, who was basically, I was saying he was the hope of the flyweight division, because he was actually an exciting finisher, and he'd finished so frequently, and by knockout quite a lot, which is good. People love that stuff. But he'd knocked out Joseph Morales and John Moraga coming into that fight, and then Formiga handled him pretty well, I thought. He kind of looked one note by the end. He was just swinging big uppercuts, and Formiga would take him down when necessary. But before that, I mean, last loss he had was to Ray Borg, a bit out of character, but, he's beaten there was a reason that he was ranked, I think he was number 1 in the world at flyweight before the UFC opened the flyweight division. But he's beaten a who's who, Zach Makowski, Wilson Hayes, Dustin Ortiz, and Dustin Ortiz is Joseph Benavidez' last win. Ulka Sasaki choked him out. Ben Nguyen one was fantastic because Ben Nguyen kept kicking and then trying to dive in immediately after it, and Formiga was actually timing him pretty well on the feet, and I think Formiga threw a kick, missed, and then spun into a back fist, and that is just, it's such a good trap. You can catch very good guys with that. There's a great clip of Korean Zombie against some Muay Thai stadium champion, and I think the spinning back fist was illegal in that fight, but he misses a kick, spins into the back fist, and the guy is running in because he's basically, the missed kick is like, your back's shown, I'm going for you now. It's a really good trap. If you watch Kung Lee, he used to throw up the hook kick all the time, because the hook kick, if you hit the side, if you miss the side kick, you're in bad position. But if you throw the hook kick up, you're putting yourself in that position, so you're a little bit more in control of it. And as the opponent comes in, you just spin and hit him with the back fist. Knock down Vandy with that. Knock down Frank Shamrock with that. But these two actually fought back in 2013, and Benavidez won that one by its stoppage, in fact, which is fairly surprising. One of two knockout losses on Formiga's record, the other one being John Dodson. That sort of established the early landscape of the division. But I suppose the question here is, firstly, how comfortable is Jussier Formiga on the feet? Because Benavidez can hit with power, probably more than Formiga, but Formiga is probably a more polished striker at certain points, at least to my eye. But Formiga's whole thing is either getting the takedown or shooting and going straight to the back. And can he do that against a wrestler as good as Benavidez? And then you've got Junior Dos Santos versus Francis Ngannou. I was going to make a Filthy Casuals guide to this one, but technical difficulties meant that I was struggling to harvest footage for it. I think this is really interesting, because Junior Dos Santos has a good jab, but it's not the same kind of jab that Miocic used to just humiliate Ngannou. And obviously the wrestling was a huge part, but obviously Curtis Blades and Cain Velasquez tell you that just wrestling is not what gets it done against Ngannou. Unless you want to pretend that Ngannou's improved so much in like the space of a week or two that now the wrestling's not an issue. No, it was everything put together by Stipe that made it such a perfect performance. If you watch Stipe, he establishes the jab and starts feinting the jab, and every time he feints, Ngannou is waiting on a hair trigger to throw an uppercut or a counter left hook or an overhand right. Because Ngannou is not a boxer, he's a big counter puncher, that's his thing. Very rarely jabs, doesn't really build volume to set up other punches. That's what we traditionally consider a boxer in the technical sense. He's waiting on you to throw something, and then he's going to swing back really hard. And if you do that, you have to be on the hair trigger, and once the opponent starts feinting, that gets really tricky. And Miocic did it to Mark Hunt exactly the same way. He was doing a great thing where he'd feint, and Ngannou would flinch for the uppercut and stop, but Ngannou's feet were so wide that Miocic would feint and then go immediately into the inside low kick and knock Ngannou's foot right out. Now, Junior Dos Santos can feint. I've seen him feint, but he doesn't do it nearly as often as Miocic, or as convincingly. What Dos Santos does have is that body jab, and that is a game changer. Guys are still taught at some gyms to ignore the body jab like it doesn't matter, and that's true at some boxing gyms too. Floyd Mayweather's best punch was the body jab, and it's such a great technique because in the standard guard, there's not really nothing is obstructing it. So to obstruct it, you have to move. And when you start moving elements of your guard, not only are you putting yourself in a position that you're not as comfortable fighting out of, but you're creating openings for the other guy. Junior Dos Santos, he used to be a lot more varied. He's become a little bit more one note in his boxing over recent years. But if you boil him down to just his essence, it's jab the body, jab the body, jab the body, overhand. Now, the body jab, some guys are pretty wary about it. We all remember Jose Aldo kneeing that dude in the head as he tried to jab the body. He tried to do it against Max Holloway because Max Holloway was jabbing the body. Again, it's just playing with people's expectations that makes it work. Max would show him a little fake level change with his shoulder, or then he'd come up with the jab to the head, and then he'd jab the body. It's never being like, okay, I'm going to jab you in the body now. Get that knee ready, here I come. Ben Rothwell was trying to hit him with knees, with Junior Dos Santos with knees when he was jabbing the body, and never was able to time it successfully. And at a certain point, if you're just picking your knees up when the opponent's lunging in or stepping in, you're really more open to that overhand, and if you get caught on one leg, that's bad news. But the interesting thing is that Junior Dos Santos does that, and he doesn't really throw like a left hook to the body, doesn't really throw right hooks to the body. He throws the odd straight right to the body, but a lot of what he does is just jab the body. And you can see it as an attrition technique. He really tires his opponents out. And I think it'd be very interesting to see if he can start landing those on Ngannou without getting countered, what he can do. Big problem with JDS's game has always been the ring craft. And again, we talk about this every time. It used to be a huge thing. Who's the best boxer in MMA? Who's the best boxer in MMA? And you'd go down the list of people that they'd said, and one or more aspects of the game would be great, and one or more aspects of their boxing game wouldn't. Junior Dos Santos has lovely jabs, lovely body work, used to throw really nice combinations, doesn't do that so much nowadays, counters well. In and out movement, he's really good at. Understanding of range, he's really good at. But his ring craft is dog shit. He will always put himself on the fence, accidentally, under any amount of pressure. Watch Jędrzejczyk versus Andrade, never gets outside of that inner black circle, black octagon, whatever. If you watch Dos Santos versus anyone, he gets it outside of that black circle, and he has to feel the fence on his foot before he starts circling out. And he added some cool stuff to sort of deal with that, but he's never really addressed the basic issue of not really knowing where the fence is and then circling out too late. And of course, I'm not asking him to have eyes in the back of the head. There's a few ways to do this. You can do this by where you are on the floor, but again, you have to sort of look at the floor. But you can also do this by the distance from the opposite side of the ring and, the opposite corner or whatever. There are ways around it. He should know how large a cage is by now. But one of the cool ways that he's sort of started dealing with it is once he gets to the fence, he'll retract his left foot into his stance, step out to his left, and get down behind the right shoulder, so that he's in like a right shoulder roll, or a southpaw shoulder roll rather. And then he'll start circling off and come back with the left hand if the opponent comes towards him. Martin Nguyen does that a lot. We looked at that in our Patreon boy study of Martin Nguyen. Sorry, I'm plugging Patreon a lot today, but we did look at that in that study. He does that. He hit Christian Lee with a beautiful left hand after circling out into a southpaw stance. I think if Ngannou's team have been watching Junior Dos, it used to be that you'd say people need pressure into the fence, and people would go, that only happened because he fought Cain Velasquez. But he did it against Mark Hunt, did it against Stipe the first time. Stipe the second time realised that was where he was going to catch Dos Santos, and promptly did. He put him to the fence, and then he timed him stepping out with the right hand, and it wasn't like a straight right hand down the centre. He moved to exactly where he knew Dos Santos was going. If Ngannou and his team have been looking at that, and he puts the pressure on Dos Santos, that'll be very interesting. If he comes out wanting to counter-swing all the time, I think Dos Santos should be able to make his life very difficult. But then, we've always got that cop-out line, it does only take one with Francis Ngannou. However, it doesn't only take one later in the fight. The thing with these monstrous punches is you've just got to make him do more of it. You can't wait on them and say, oh, please don't throw any punches, I'm okay when you're not throwing any punches. You've got to make him throw more punches out the air. It takes a lot of effort to produce the amount of power that these guys are doing. They're swinging with their whole being. Make them do it more when you're not stepping in. That's the best thing about feinting. It is a half-assed movement. It requires no commitment from you. It just has to be convincing, So you do have to actually jab sometimes. You actually have to step in and grit your teeth. But the act of feinting is brilliant because you're not giving them anything, and yet you're taking something from them. Getting very poetic now. Anyway, we're running long on time, so let's get... we didn't even talk about Junior Dos Santos' new love affair with kicking, but we're running a bit long, and I did say I'd answer some of these questions from last week. So here we go. Hey Jack, long-time reader and patron. Love your work. It really helps me enjoy the fight more and helps me a lot when I spar. Spar myself. Oh no, I spar myself or I'm teaching others to spar. I practice semi-contact karate, not MMA, but many of the principles carry over. Totally hypothetical question. How do you think MMA, brackets, or any striking combat sport, would change if weight classes were replaced by height classes? Assume for the sake of argument the commissions came up with a reasonably foolproof way to measure height, no slouching into a lower height class. I suspect many of the champs would change since the system wouldn't reward rangy, lanky guys as much. Would the champions be kind of fat? Do you think the different styles would emerge in a height equalized sport? I'm not necessarily looking for arguments that this would be a good thing or a bad thing for the sport. More a matter of of how the sport would change or would have developed differently if this were the norm. Cheers from Joe. This is an interesting one, especially since he just said he does semi-contact karate. In point sparring stuff, I remember I used to go along to competitions and they'd be by weight class, and you're going, but it's not. There's nothing here that would rely on weight. You're not trying to knock the other guy out. And there's no throwing in some of these competitions. Why are they done by weight class? Height is an enormous advantage in point fighting because you only have to touch the other guy. Very strange. But if you go under like WKF rules, World Karate Federation or whatever it is, they're allowing a lot more throws now, so it tends to be like failed judoka. Like Rafael Aguirre is a very successful points karateka, and mainly he's a very short guy, and he mainly gets by on his good footwork, head movement, and he'll burst in quick, and then he'll throw the guy. So, I mean, that's an example of a sport where a height disadvantage should really be a disadvantage, and he's made it not a disadvantage. But height class is a very strange idea. And I was doing something on this today. I was writing for Unibet a piece on Usyk, the Ukrainian guy, cruiserweight, who's just gone up to heavyweight, and the WBO because he's vacated his WBO cruiserweight title, they've made him the number one contender for the WBO heavyweight title, which is obviously owned by Andy Ruiz. But that's, that locks him into like two other titles. But in that piece, I was talking about how there seems to be a lot more to a heavyweight than just the build, or rather just the height and the reach. Because the great example I used was Bob Foster, Sheriff Bob. Monstrous puncher as a light heavyweight. One of the greatest punchers of all time, knocked out an awful lot of people, was light heavyweight champion of the world for like 8 years. And basically anyone he fought at light heavyweight, he smoked. But then he did the thing that all the light heavyweights do when they start doing well at light heavyweight. He said, okay, well, the real money is in the heavyweight title, and then you only have to fight like once a year. So he goes up to heavyweight, and he fought Joe Frazier and Muhammad Ali. Now, Joe Frazier is the interesting one, because Joe Frazier is 6 foot even, and Bob Foster was 6'4", I believe, 6'3", and a long, lanky guy. And it's just so obvious that one of them is a heavyweight, and it isn't the tall guy. And Frazier is just so much stronger than him, smacks him about, knocks him out in the second round. More interestingly is the one with Muhammad Ali, because Muhammad Ali has about an inch of height on him. He was 6'4", but Muhammad Ali looks so much bigger when you see them. Like, he's much more muscular. And he goes forward, and Bob Foster hits him with his hardest punches, and Muhammad Ali does the shaky leg thing, like, oh, I'm going down now, and then just comes back at him. Bob Foster hits him again, does the shaky leg thing again, just taunting him, basically. And Muhammad Ali walks him down, which is something that you didn't see Muhammad Ali do against most other heavyweights, and Muhammad Ali knocks him out. And that's the difference between it being a great light heavyweight and being a great heavyweight. There is a real difference to build and power, and people like Andy Ruiz, definitely not incapable of cutting down to a lower weight class, you would expect. And Deontay Wilder is only like 215. But they are used to the strength and the hitting power of heavyweights. Andy Ruiz has been fighting heavyweights his whole life, and he's very much used to wrestling in the clinch with heavyweights, fighting heavyweights. Had he fought a light heavyweight his entire life, like as a trim light heavyweight, and then gone up to heavyweight, that would be a bit more shocking for him. But returning to height and how it, there's 5'9" and there's 5'9". Max Holloway is the same height as Mark Hunt. You know? And Mark Hunt's got some extra weight on him that's not necessarily muscle, but those two guys are clearly very different. Very different weight classes, but obviously, you know, if you had them fighting each other, that would just be ludicrous. However, it would make things very interesting because you'd see guys trying to pack on more weight to fight at their height class, rather than draining themselves with weight cuts, which I would be very interested in seeing. You might have some guys like Gordon Ryan who don't do like Olympic lifts or any of the things that you're supposed to do as an athlete. You know, Olympic lifts you do because the whole soreness comes from the eccentric, the down part of the movement. So Olympic lifts are supposed to be something that you can do more frequently, so you work them into your training plan and stuff. He doesn't do any of that. He does bodybuilding, so he's like doing, you know, dozens and dozens of reps, multiple sets every day, and obviously roided to the gills, but his goal has been to build up muscle rather than functional power and strength for his weight class. And that whole connection between muscle and strength is really interesting, because obviously a bigger muscle has more potential for strength, but strength is also kind of a technique. So you can lift enormous weights with less muscle than the guy next to you. But then you would probably see like a drop-off on that. You'd see more guys, you'd see some guys packing on weight to try and be as big as possible, but you'd probably see more guys come around down like to top end of middleweight, light heavyweight weight, I would expect, because if you were still going over the same number of rounds, I think that is probably like the optimum weight possible for, you know, a reasonable build. You know, if you're like 5'9", 5'10", 5'11", you probably want to be like 190 in decent shape. You know, you're not cutting weight anymore, so 190, 200. Yeah, I'm just doing all bro science right now, but it would be really interesting to see. These are the things that I would love to just be able to throw money at. You know, if I inherited like $50 million, I'd do a Jack Slack Invitational, and I'd set stupid rules on it like this, but I'd have like a $3 million prize money. And dudes would sign up to it, and we'd actually see. Probably be like Travis View win again, but, you know, whatever. Cheers, Joe. Hi, Jack, the Genghis Khan of swinging arms, the Strangler from East Anglia, and the Jeremy Vine of bitching online. I've been reading and tuning in for a long time, so a big thank you for all your content. I especially enjoy how formal and posh your first episode was compared to now, where you just rave about drug abuse, your local bin man, and the size of Chris Weidman's head. Also the size of his dumper. He's got an arse on him. My question is about the advantages of weight. There we go, these are all linked. I remember Joe Rogan and others ranting about how good Roy Nelson would have been if he'd just gotten in shape. But I'm not so sure. The way I see it, Roy's weight added to his punching power, protected his body from damage. I'm thinking about the Overeem fight, prevented the body lock, I suppose so, and made him heavier on top. As a 205er, I think he would have been average, with less power and therefore no outstanding skills. Do you think someone like him benefits from being out of shape but big, in a division where no one lasts more than 5 minutes anyway? What other fighters benefit from physical assets such as chin and power but lack basic skills? As a cheeky aside, what was your prediction in the end on the fantasized but undelivered Jones versus Rumble match? How can someone not known as a big hitter like Jones keep an aggressive swarmer off him if the opponent has power and commitment not to pace themselves? I'm thinking of Hendricks versus Costa. Your Patreon boy, fellow Britain historian, Jason. So we'll do Fat Lads first. I said it before the Andy Ruiz versus Anthony Joshua fight. I'm so sad no one read my Unibet preview of that, because I was bang on the money. Just by giving Ruiz the chance and respecting him, basically because I didn't know him much. I looked him up, I watched his fights, I said, okay, cool, these are the skills he has. I respect them. You know, I'm not saying he'll beat Anthony Joshua, but he's certainly not a bum, and then he comes out and those skills won and they paid the bills. But Ruiz is an interesting example. But, you know, it's really interesting talking about, like, big fat people before they, like, I'm talking super obese people. Before they go into like, lipo, you know, not lipo, the gastric band and things like that, it's the surgeries. It's always surprising because they get told, like, their lean muscle mass and things like that, because you have to do that imaging, what is the MRI or the X-ray, whatever it is, but you can always look at them and their bones haven't changed. They're the same fucking size. They've just got a ton of fat around it. But they're always told they're lean muscle as well. And it's always quite surprising how much of their weight is lean muscle. And that's partly because anytime they do have to stand up or move or drag themselves around, they're dragging this enormous weight at the same time. I think Andy Ruiz and guys like that, their the shape of them is deceptive. I think people don't expect... And the other thing about Ruiz, especially, is that he's in good condition. He comes in and he goes at a good pace for the full number of rounds, which a lot of the guys who are like 250 and trim, which, you know, we don't really trust that. But a lot of these guys who are like 250 and trim can't do. Obviously, Roy Nelson's a bit different because he was genuinely out of shape. And by out of shape, I mean couldn't do the number of rounds he was paid to do. Whereas Andy Ruiz is probably not healthy in the sense that it's not healthy to carry that much extra fat, but he is in good condition, as in he can go a good number of rounds. One of the things that, would worry me if I were Andy Ruiz or Andy Ruiz's trainer is that he's very heavy, and boxing is still a sport that places an enormous amount of emphasis on jogging or road work rather. And and of course jumping rope too. I'd be interested to see how many heavyweights of any sort of build, how that affects their knees, because the knee joints do come in different sizes, but it's always the same, and the more weight you're jumping on top of it with, the worse it is for you. So I'd be very interested to see, how that is affecting Andy Ruiz's knees when he does the huge amounts of road work that I presume are necessary to be able to box at that pace for that many rounds. But again, yeah, I probably agree with you with Nelson. I mean, he could move pretty quick when he wanted to, and that was an advantage. But he was strong enough to go in the clinch with these guys, and I think that if he did cut the weight, I think you'd be surprised how much of it was muscle. He'd probably lose some of the muscle on the way down, but I think it would be very interesting to know how much of his weight is lean muscle. And again, the whole thing about the heavyweight division is that it's so fascinating because it is basically an experiment. It's an absolute division. You can be 206 pounds or you could be 265 pounds. It's basically absolute. So some of these giant guys have to cut some weight, but in MMA at least, in boxing it's still open. But guys like Fedor, Cain Velasquez, we were always saying, imagine what they could do if they went down to light heavyweight. And I don't think they do the same. I think not draining yourself with the weight cut and being fast and technical at that, in that class full of guys who are just there because a lot of them are just there because guys said, man, you're fucking huge. You should try MMA or boxing or whatever it is, Yeah, so anyway, Jones versus Rumble, that's an interesting one. I still, it's my guilty pleasure. I'm still like, maybe Rumble would have done him. But I think Rumble, firstly, the mental stuff, he does just sort of give up at a certain point. But secondly, Jones's footwork is very good. When we say the best boxer in MMA, like I was saying with Junior Dos Santos earlier, people don't factor in the footwork, which is a huge part of boxing. John Jones barely throws his hands at all, but he has some of the best ring craft in MMA. Very good at staying out of trouble. And the other thing that John Jones is very good at is if you're going to give him any sort of trouble with your power, he will tie you up, wear your arms out, and try and tear your shoulder off too. Did it to Gustafsson in the last fight, did it to Glover Teixeira, did it to Daniel Cormier. I think it would be very interesting to see, because Rumble, his takedown defense was always very handsy. He'd just he'd dig underhooks and throw people off him. It was never a footwork thing. And he relied a lot on his strength and his power. And those typically drain throughout a fight. Now, Jones versus Ngannou, that's where it's at. Cheers, Jason. Right. I've prattled on for ages now. If you want to get in on the Patreon, we've just done a recap of Lovato versus Mousasi, looking at some of the really interesting things that Lovato was doing. The Frankie Edgar knee picks, the pulling guard off the shots, the inversions that he used very successfully to snap back on a triangle, a classic Ryan Hall move. And his guard passing, because, I fucking love guard passing me. It's my favourite part of MMA and of grappling. So hop on the Patreon, and we're doing something tomorrow too. I haven't quite decided what I'm going to finish and put up. Various projects in various stages of completion. That's what they always tell you to say if you're a shitty movie maker. Because an idea is still technically a project. It's in a stage of completion. So sign up to the Patreon. That's what I was saying. If you want to send an email to the podcast, fightsgoneby@gmail.com. If you want to see what I'm writing at any time, including Unibet pieces, because I can't link them on YouTube because the fuckers claim that I'm trying to get people gambling. Or children gambling. If you're a child listening to this, you've got problems already. But go to fightprimer.com. That's where all my shit is. And buy the book Notorious. Someone said last week, are you the same Jack Slack who wrote the book Notorious? Yes, I am he. I haven't plugged it in a while. That's the problem. I'm your boy Jack Slack, and I will catch you on Monday. Giant, juicy bodybuilding rumble bless.